Good morning, everyone. This is Julie McDonald with Microcom Technologies. I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar with Ubiquiti Networks. Today's host is Alex Marcham. He is their AirMax product manager, and he'll be presenting today. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them in the question box, and Alex will answer them at the end of today's presentation. Alex, thank you so much for being with us today. I am finished for now. You can go ahead and take it on over.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us for this webinar this morning. I thought probably the best thing that we could cover, as it's the first time I think that we've done a webinar with you guys for a little while here, is to go over just some basic AirMax product setup, and I'll try and get through this in a decent amount of time. And anyone who has any questions as we're going through, please just let me know in the webinar chat box there, and we'll do our best to answer those when we get towards the end. But yeah, basically what I wanted to cover today is really just setting up, one of our, current generation AirMax AC products, kind of from start to finish with some basic setup, a little bit of touching on some of the other advanced features that we can talk about, and really just enough to get everyone up and running with our current generation, flagship AirMax AC gear that we've got out there in the field. So without further ado, so I always like to point out that before you start configuring anything to do with AirMax, I think the best thing that you can do is spend just a little bit of time planning out what your link is actually going to look like. So I'm sure some of you guys have used link simulation tools in the past. Basically, they're very simple conceptually and not so simple to implement, unfortunately from our side. There's a lot of complex calculations and everything that we handle in the background so that you can get a nice clear link prediction calculation here. But basically the idea here is, as you can see on the left, I have two ends of a point-to-point link here, and this one's set up somewhere in the middle of New York, and we've got one end that's 12 kilometers above ground elevation, one end that's 12 meters above ground elevation at the other end as well, and the link is going about 5.07 kilometers. We can see that the expected signals are pretty much bang on where we would want them. We typically aim for a minus 50 dBm receive signal, so that's ideal, and we can expect somewhere in the area of 121 megabit link with a 20 megahertz channel bandwidth. So this is all available through a freely usable tool that we have called AirLink or Link, which is at link.ui.com. We've recently updated the UI a little bit, so it's a little bit more intuitive than the one I have shown on the screen, but it's a very simple and easy to use tool, and is definitely the first place to go when you are looking to set up an AirMax link, because then you can compare the results that you actually get once you've deployed it with what you were predicted to get originally. So definitely take a look at that before you start deploying any AirMax gear. But let's say you've done that, you've said, okay, I know where I'm going to deploy each end of my link, and I want to move on to actually configuring the gear itself. Typically I would recommend getting both ends of your AirMax link or your AP and as many clients as you're deploying at that time, in a lab environment or in a basement or wherever you've got, to really just go through their initial configurations. So that's really what I'm going to go through here before you go out and deploy them. So we default to HTTPS on our radios by default for secure access to the web management interface. A lot of the time, sometimes users won't have our self-signed, Ubiquiti HTTPS certificate already loaded in the certificate store on their OS, and that's fine. That's expected. It doesn't make the connection any less secure. It's just that your browser does not already know about that particular certificate. So, this is the warning that Safari on Mac OS X gives me when I try to access a new unit. Pretty much just click through this. You can see the link at the bottom there. If you understand the risks involved, you can visit the website. There are really no risks involved in this case. It's just that the browsers like to present you some increasingly scary warnings in case you're going to, you go to bankofamerica.com, for example, and you don't recognize their certificate. That would be an issue. For the AirMax side of things, it's really not, because of how we sign the certificates on the devices themselves. So just click through that. You can see we've got a self-signed root certificate signed by Ubiquiti, and you can just verify that if you need to, but it's not going to be an issue. Just click through any browser warnings that you get, and you will be at this initial setup page. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I would point out one thing at the bottom here. We have a link to the UNMS Mobile App, which is available for Android and iOS devices. And definitely take a look at that when you are installing and deploying AirMax gear, because although I'm going to go through the web interface for setting up a AirMax link today, one of the nice things with this UNMS mobile app is you can configure and deploy, pretty much any of our current AirMax radios just with your, smartphone or your iPad or whatever your mobile device of choice is, without requiring, you to take a laptop to the top of the tower or to the roof of a house and connecting that up with a spool of Cat5. So definitely take a look at that. Each one of our Gen 2 AirMax AC products, which is our current range of AirMax AC products, the flagship stuff that we promote the most, is very notable for featuring an inbuilt Wi-Fi kind of local range AP of its own, if you will. So you can turn these radios on. It will broadcast a local range SSID that you can connect to with your smartphone, tablet, whatever you have, and then you just launch the UNMS app and you can configure the devices that way. So it's a very neat configuration option that we have there for you, as well as this web interface. But I'll go through the web interface because it's a little bit easier just to show it, because the pages are a little bit bigger, and we'll go through it this way. But definitely take a look at the UNMS mobile app in the future when you are installing or looking at any of these devices as well. So country selection is pretty obvious. Obviously, please select the the country in which you are operating, so that we make sure you are operating on the same channels and powers as are allowed by the regulatory body under which you are operating, such as the FCC in the US. Language is obviously self-explanatory. It's language displayed in the UI, and we have a terms of use, click through there as well. You'll also notice that we have an upload backup configuration button there. Once you've selected the country and the language and accepted the terms of use here, you can upload a backed up configuration file. Perhaps you're restoring a device that's you've reset to default, so you want to put the old configuration back on it. Perhaps you've got a configuration file from another device and you're replacing that device. You can upload that backup configuration file here, and it will make things a lot quicker than having to click through everything and then upload it at a later point. So it's a nice little time-saving feature there. So username and password creation, as you would expect with any modern, security conscious system, we have a couple of password complexity rules here. We have a minimum password length. We have, all the typical things that you get when you're setting up an account on a modern website today. You have, character limits, character requirements, mixed case letters, numbers, symbols, etc. Any reasonably secure password will do. And this is also to make sure that you change it from the default login of UBNT. So that is, pretty standard stuff. And then once we've logged into there, we see this is the very first thing that we tend to see when we log in to an AirMax device. Now, because I've just logged into this unit, it hasn't had a lot of time to gather a lot of the useful data that you'll see on this page later on. So this is also my AP. I've got on the left there, this is a Prism Station unit, and it's attempting to find any clients that may be out there that are configured to connect to it. Now, at the moment, those clients haven't been set up yet. I'll get to that in a moment. But you can see some of the information here. For instance, this gray bar in the middle of the page is actually going to display a real-time spectrum management view. And you see also in the top right there, there is a little warning box there that says, do you want to turn on or off that inbuilt Wi-Fi management capability that I mentioned earlier? So you can deactivate that in the UI if you're not using it. So we click through that, we click off that little warning for the inbuilt Wi-Fi management AP. We're still waiting for the AP here to gather some more data as it's just been started up. But what we can do in the meantime is go to the wireless configuration page here and click through some of the configuration options that we have. So I always like to say to people, regardless of whether you're doing a multi-point setup, you're doing a network that has an ACAP and all AC clients, maybe you're doing an ACAP and a mix of AC and M clients, I would recommend always using this wireless mode of access point to multi-point AirMax mixed, which is what we've got there. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but basically that is the mode that we've spent the past 18 months, 2 years doing a lot of work on. So it's really our highest performance mode that also lets you use a lot of other features that we have recently implemented into AirOS as well. So definitely use that for a multi-point setup, which is what I'll go through in this presentation. So you can see we select that. We've also got the typical configuration options that you would expect here. We've got country that was set on startup, as I showed you a moment ago. We also have a couple of others, such as the channel width. You can see I've configured that for 40 megahertz. We have an SSID set to the default of UBNT, and at the moment this is set to use auto channel selection. Now shortly I'll change that to a manual channel. I would typically recommend that you do the same, just because it tends to give you a little bit better performance than relying on the radio's ability to select its own channel. That's something that we are continuously improving, but typically at the moment I would recommend manually selecting a channel, and I'll show a little bit about how to do that shortly as well. In the top right of this page, you can see we have a little bit of info readout on the different features and different link modes that we've selected. So that gives you a little bit of background information. I won't go too far into that because it's not too relevant for this particular example. The antenna we've selected is a 90-degree horn antenna. That is the one that I had connected to this radio, which sets all of my EIRP and regulatory considerations appropriately, so that's nice. Auto adjust distance is set to on. I would leave that on by default. It makes sure that the link generates the correct set of kind of ACK and response timings for the distance that it calculates itself. The AP calculates itself to be away from each of its subscribers, basically just to give you the best performance. And I would recommend leaving max TX data rate and data rate module to their defaults. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is a few of the features here under wireless security. We, as of the most recent couple of software releases, we have removed the kind of open authentication. We think it's to everyone's benefit for people to use WPA2, and what we do is by default we have a WPA2 passphrase of 8 zeros installed, so that you can connect devices that have been reset to default or otherwise had their configuration wiped. But obviously we recommend using a strong WPA2 appreciate key just to stop anyone from being able to snoop on your wireless traffic. Wireless network protection there you see is listed as a new feature. What that feature allows you to do is essentially give the network a little bit more protection against anybody who is attempting to access your AP via the wireless interface, either inadvertently or as an intentional attack attempt. Basically what that does is encrypts the management control messages between the AP and its client. So you can turn that on and it has no performance impact, so I would recommend just turning that on. MAC ACL and MAC ACL you don't typically need to use unless you are specifically trying to block specific devices from connecting to the AP. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the messages that are shown on the UI here, given that I've now changed the TDD framing to flexible new. So what I'd recommend for most installs, I talked earlier about having this wireless mode of point-to-point AirMax mixed. Combine that with the flexible new TDD framing that's listed below. That is typically going to give you the best performance. There are cases where you'll want to use fixed framing, where you're doing things like GPS sync, where you're synchronizing multiple APs to transmit and receive at the same time. But we can always get into that a little bit later on or in another session, as that's a little bit more of an advanced topic. So for most links, I would recommend just looking at AirMax mixed wireless mode and TDD framing of flexible new. You'll notice when I selected flexible new, I also got access to another feature to the right there, which we call RESE, or Receive Signal Enhancement, RESE. And what that essentially does is make the network more resilient to sources of external interference. And again, there shouldn't be any performance detriment from enabling that. And often we see about a 30 to 35% improvement over previous generation link modes that we had in AirOS, and this combination of flexible new and RESE turned on. So definitely take a look at those. Under the advanced list of features, I would typically recommend not really changing any of these. The only one I would recommend turning on is automatic power control, because that will help the AP to control the power that its subscribers are using when they're transmitting to the AP, which helps you prevent self-interference from occurring. So see, I've selected RESE, just a little pop-up of the help text that describes the feature that it gives you when you select that feature. So I've applied the changes and we are away, basically. They've been applied to the configuration. You can see automatic transmit power control. I've set a target signal of minus 50 dBm. That is going to give us an ideal link, and basically what the AP will now do is tell each of its subscribers to automatically adjust its transmit power so that the AP is getting that minus 50 receive signal. So the system pretty much can take care of its own transmit power configuration. It shouldn't be something you need to worry about once you've set that feature up. So it's very useful. So you can see I've selected at this point a specific sender frequency, 5780 megahertz, and I'll go through shortly how we give you a lot of information about channel selection that lets you make that decision. But you can see it's warned me that I've selected a new channel. That's pretty much what we'd expect. Now, as I've saved this configuration, the AP's been running for a few more minutes now, and it's had time to do a full real-time spectrum scan. So as well as the ability to transmit that second local range management SSID that I was talking about with the Wi-Fi radio, we can also use an additional radio in each AirMax AC device to basically perform continuous real-time spectrum analysis across the entire band. So this is a 5 gigahertz radio, and you can see that this colored bar toward the top, third of the screen there is actually a real-time view of the spectrum conditions where I was setting up this unit. And you can see that I picked pretty much it's all pretty clean spectrum, as you can see here, luckily for me, but I picked a very clean area of that to operate in along the right-hand side of the graph there near the top of the band. So that's a very useful capability that we provide automatically in every AirMax AC device that you can see in real time just on the web UI here, as well as through our UNMS management system as well for each device. So quick look through the network settings. Again, we're just going to set up a very simple bridge network here. This is pretty much going to be a transparent wireless wire, if you will. So we don't need to configure things like spanning tree protocol, management VLAN support, or any of this kind of stuff today. Same with a lot of the advanced network configuration. You can see we don't need to change a lot of these interface-specific settings today either. But there's a lot of potential configuration in there for more advanced setups that make this a very flexible product to use in a lot of different networks. So clicking through router mode, you can see also, you'd have the same general configuration you'd expect from any device that's functioning as a router, a lot more layer 3 configuration options. And of course, we also do support IPv6 in AirMax AC as well, for those of you looking towards that next generation addressing protocol. So in the services side of things, again, not much you'll need to change here, especially for a basic device. I would say one thing, the Ubiquiti network management system at the top there, that is our sort of single pane of glass network-wide NMS system. I actually did a webinar on that through our own YouTube channel yesterday, so definitely check that out if you have a minute. But basically, that is a very competent network management system that aims to integrate all of the Ubiquiti operator products, so not the Unify side of things, but AirMax, AirFiber, EdgeMax, UFiber, all that kind of stuff, into one very intuitive and cohesive network management system. So definitely take a look at that. The rest of these you can pretty much leave as they are. You'll notice we default to a secure configuration by default. We only have, the only unsecured management protocol that we have enabled by default is the HTTP port server 80 is on. You can turn that off in here as well. We don't have Telnet, for example, enabled by default, and typically most users are going to access these via HTTPS. So this is for adopting a device into UNMS, and I won't go into that in too much detail today, but again, if you are interested in that, definitely check out some of our webinars on the Ubiquiti Networks YouTube channel. There is a webinar playlist, and we just recently did a little mini series of 2 UNMS-centric webinars that kind of explain what this is. So again, the typical things that you'd expect for a system configuration, we don't need to change a whole lot of these. I would recommend setting the date and time on every one of your network devices, just so that we're all synced up to the same common time. So if we're looking at logs or anything, they all match up between devices. You can see management radio settings. We can disable that local range Wi-Fi connection from the radio on startup. If we want to, we can change device name, change what's reported as in the GUI, for example. We could set that to a customer name or a device tower location, for example, and we can also upload the most recent firmware to the device. We can back up configuration, all that kind of stuff that you'd expect. So now that we've set up the AP, I'm just going to whiz through and set up this client that is going to connect to him. So this is our CPE, or this is the end of this multi-point link that's going to go on a customer's house, for example, or on a business premises, somewhere like that. So it's pretty similar, really. I've set the country, I've set everything else up. I'm going to log into this device. You can see links below here to the different parts of our free network operator software suite at the bottom there. UNMS we kind of talked about. UCRM is very interesting as well. That's a free backend system for customer relationship management. Definitely take a look at that. Link is the link planning tool that I discussed at the very start of the presentation, and Wi-Fi Man is a neat little network management tool for people who are looking to analyze Wi-Fi networks as well. So definitely take a look at all of those. When I'm configuring the station, there isn't quite as much to configure as there was for the access point, but just make sure that obviously certain things such as the SSID are common between them. The SSID and the WPA2 pre-shared key obviously need to be the same for these two devices to be willing to talk to each other, as do the wireless modes. So we're connecting to an access point that's set up to be an access point in point-to-multipoint AirMax mixed mode. All we have to do is select station point-to-multipoint mode, and we're pretty much away, as long as we've got the right WPA2 key and the right SSID. So we can click through that. We can actually see in the site survey function here, we can actually see the test SSID, which is what I set up our AP as in the previous example. I can actually see here that the radio here is able to distinguish it from all of the Wi-Fi APs that are visible from my house. And we can see that it's identified it as a Prism Station 5AC, which is what we set up. And it's looking at its signal levels. Obviously, these are very, very high as I was setting them up in the same room. But this gives you a very quick view of the SSIDs that are around in your local area and lets you see whether you're able to see your remote end. So it's a very useful little feature to get initial connections up. So basic wireless settings, as I've set automatic power control to on, so that matches the AP's configuration. Same with auto adjust distance, and the rest of the configuration is pretty much the same. So again, we're not going to go into a lot of detail on the network configuration side of things, because a lot of networks are typically going to deploy these devices in bridge mode. They're going to function as a transparent layer 2 connection between these 2 points, and we don't need to go into the layer 3 router configuration for each device, but you can see there are basically the same options there. The same for the services side of things. Again, if you were using UNMS, you would adopt both the AP and the CPE or the station here into UNMS at the same time, so that you can manage all of them through that same system. And again, system provides you with pretty much the same suite of capabilities that you would expect as we had on the AP. One difference to note is that in the client case, the AP earlier had its own GPS receiver, so it was able to automatically load its own latitude, longitude, and an estimate of its height, as height is typically a bit inaccurate with GPS, but latitude and longitude tend to be pretty much on the money. Our client device here does not have its own integrated GPS receiver, so you can just manually type those values in here, and that gives you some extra capabilities in terms of what we're able to show you in the GUI and what we're able to show you in terms of a link prediction as well. I would also note that under device, where we have Air View here, just make sure that's set to on all your devices, because that is how we generate that real-time view of the spectrum that we showed earlier, that long colored bar across the UI. If you click the UNMS button in the top right, it will take you to this page to give UNMS a try. Definitely take a look at that if you haven't already. And as I mentioned, check out any of our official Ubiquiti Networks webinars on the YouTube channel as well. So I'm still connected to my client, but the difference between the last time we saw the dashboard page here and now is that we're actually connected. My client is connected to my AP, and apart from my astonishingly high signal levels, as these radios were deployed in the same room, things are looking pretty good. You'll notice that at the very top of the page, we have a neat little intuitive graphic that kind of tells you the link distance, the SSID, the current airtime, which is low because I'm not transmitting any data over this link at the moment, and the current estimated capacity for each end of the link as well. You notice on the left we have the device name. At the moment, the device name and the device type are listed as the same thing. I could change that to Keith's house or an address, for example, to make it clearer when I'm looking through. Under TX power, we have -4 dBm auto limits reached, which means that automatic transmit power control is functioning as we expect it to, which is great. And the same really for the remote end. The remote end also lists its location there with the little pin icon next to its latitude and longitude figures and the MAC address for both devices. You can see also, which is a very neat function of this updated Aero S8 dashboard, you can see the AirView real-time spectrum view from both ends of the link at the same time. And it's very useful, especially when you think of a device that may be deployed 5 kilometers away on a tower is almost certainly going to have a different view of the spectrum environment than one that is deployed in a suburb on the top of somebody's house. So it's very, very useful to see this capability that we have on the UI just side by side, because there may be a channel that works fine for the client, but for the AP it's exceedingly noisy, and you may be wondering, this looks clear for the client, why is the AP unhappy? It's very easy to see with this UI. Below that, we have the signal levels for the two chains, the H and V chain, which makes this a fully MIMO compatible radio. We have the noise floor figures, the local and remote RX data rates. You can see we're hitting the full 256 QAM MIMO data rate here, as you would expect, because they're so close together. Below that, we have some real-time updated graphs that would show us the capacity, throughput, signal noise, and interference, depending on what we have selected. You notice my actual throughput here is low, purely because I'm not actually transmitting data through the link. Capacity is really what we're looking at here, and that is what we'd expect it to be at. If we scroll down further, then there's receive rate history when the link has been operating a little bit longer, and some other details here as well. For instance, what the date and time, device uptime, real-time CPU and memory usage, location, distance from each other, all that kind of stuff that you'd expect. So no big surprises there, but a lot of very useful information shown on that one page that really gives you an at-a-glance view of the whole link. So I'll quickly whiz through a couple of the tools that we have here. So we have basically a network interfaces tool here that gives you some in-depth information and counters like you may be familiar with from other network devices. You can see how many bytes and error packets and things have been transmitted on each interface. We can also blow out the AirView data from that single bar that was on the main dashboard page there into a bigger real-time waveform view, which is nice. You can also see the waterfall and ambient noise level over time, which was a very neat capability to have, especially in a radio in this kind of price range. I mean, if you were to go out and purchase a spectrum analyzer that was able to, scan across these bands, it would be, one, far more expensive, and two, you wouldn't be able to operate it all the time at every single one of your radio sites, which we give you, automatically for free in every AirMax AC radio. So it's a very powerful capability. We also have an antenna alignment tool. As you can see, I don't really need to use this here because these devices are so close together, they're pretty much blasting each other with their signals. But one thing to note here is you'll see, let's see the remote signal per chain figure, -23 brackets, -24, -28. So what does that mean? -23 here is really a summation of these two figures. So basically, the -24 and -28 are per chain values. And you'll notice this is denoted by the delta 4 symbol in yellow after the dBm figure there. So basically what this means is I've got a bit of a chain imbalance. I want to have a chain imbalance, if any, of less than 3 dBm. And that means that there's an opportunity for me to either realign my radio to get better performance or to avoid an obstruction to get better performance as well. So definitely something to bear in mind. There's also an audio indicator that we can play through the PC speakers through the browser that will give you an audible indication for alignment, and all this kind of stuff is also available in the UNMS Mobile App as well. Device discovery. We're not going to see a whole lot of information here because I've got, basically two devices, but, this is very useful for being able to quickly verify what devices are connected to the network. We also have that site survey tool that we looked at earlier, which shows that the middle of the band here is completely clean, basically, in my area. And then we have our actual Prism Station SSID as the strongest one on the right here. We have the pretty much standard network troubleshooting tools that you would expect in the form of ping and traceroute from each device. It is nice to be able to run those just from each device rather than from a router or something behind them that may then interact with a firewall or another device and not give you the exact cleanest view of the network from the exact location the radio is deployed in. And we also have a speed test. So the best way to use this speed test is to use it to measure the wireless link capacity in an isolated fashion. Being able to do that this way is very useful and saves a lot of the issues. Sometimes people will come in and say, hey, I connected a PC to my CPE on my station, and I went to speedtest.net and I got a bad result. And then you have to think, well, that could be due to a lot of different factors, but first let's isolate the wireless link and go through what exactly the performance we are seeing on that is before we think about that whole end-to-end path that also begins to incorporate the internet. Constellation diagrams, these are pretty much a neat little visual thing that we provide in here. Basically, we want to be seeing the largest number of dots on these graphs, and we want to see them positioned as neatly as possible within their own boxes. If we were operating in a lower modulation mode, for example, like 16 QAM, we would see much larger dots in a smaller number of boxes. Essentially, these are how the radio is able to transmit and decode very dense data each and every transmission that is sent and received by them to give us this high data rate that we expect from AirMax AC gear. So it's neat to see. Probably won't be using it too much to troubleshoot though. System log, pretty much what you'd expect. I don't think you'll really need to look in here very often, but sometimes, if there's an issue or, customers having a problem, for example, as support, we may ask for, a snippet of the log. So it's very easily accessible in the bottom left there. And pretty much in terms of setup, I've gone back now to the AP just so you can see it from the AP's perspective. It's very similar. We've just switched around which radio we're actually looking at. You can see in the top right we have remote ×1. If we were operating with more than one client connected to this AP, we'd be able to click through to those different subscribers, through the AP, if you will, which makes it very easy to manage them. And really, there's not a whole lot that's different in the web UI after we've set the link up from the AP's perspective. One thing that you can do is use on the AP this tool that we have called AirMagic. So basically what this tool allows you to do is get a neat little estimation of the spectral efficiency, which is a measure in terms of bits per second per hertz of how effective our usage of the wireless spectrum is. So obviously we want the highest figure possible because we want to be making the best use of the spectrum that we have, and we're able to basically pan across the whole band using the same data that we had in the air view and go from there. So it's a very neat little tool, and it gives you a little bit more information than we were able to give you with AirView, and you can also see which channels are DFS channels as well if using those is an issue in your area. So that is pretty much what I had in terms of the AirMax basic setup. I think that's enough to get pretty much anyone up and running with any of the AirMax AC gear. I mean, depending on what network configuration setup you have, there may be times when you want to do things like routing mode and IPv6 setup, in which case you've got just a little bit more configuration to do, but nothing particularly onerous. There may be cases where you've got multiple APs that need to reuse the same channel, and then you want to set things up using GPS sync and fixed frame. Again, from the configuration standpoint, not really very difficult. Just main thing to be would just be making sure that your network is physically set up properly for that. But again, from a configuration standpoint, nothing particularly tricky about it. And I hope this showed that even though these products can give you a lot of very advanced features and functions, actually using them is something that we've paid a lot of attention to, and we've tried to make these things as simple really as they can be to use. And pretty much with every release, we are trying to simplify and streamline the actual usage and management of this equipment to make things as easy as possible for the network operator and the end user as well. So that is pretty much what I had. If you guys have any questions, please do send them in.
Alex, thank you so much for that presentation. We enjoyed it very much. I've got several questions here for you. Let me start at the beginning. I'll read them off to you and give you an opportunity to answer. First one here, for further configuration of the devices, is there anyone Microcom can reach out to for further support instead of going to the forums for answers?
Yeah, so I mean, if you have any specific issues, I think Julie, I'm happy for you to share my email with the team, and I can try and reply to any questions that you guys have that come in. You've noticed that we do tend to try and point people obviously towards the forum or now the official Ubiquiti ISP Facebook group and things like that, just to try and keep things scalable. But if you guys have any specific configuration issues, or what's the best practice for this, what's best practice for that, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email about that.
Excellent, thank you. I can certainly share that email. Next question here for you. Can we access or separate each tower managed that we have, or will each need its own login?
Could you run that one by me again?
Sure. It says, can we access or separate each tower managed that we have, or will each need its own login?
Okay. I think I may be reading a little bit too much into this particular question, but I mean, I would recommend having a unique login for each tower personally. One way that we make that easier to do is if you use, for instance, the UNMS network management system that I was mentioning earlier. Once you've adopted a device into that system, you're not going to be having to manually put your login credentials into that every 10 minutes, right? It's going to save those. Those can be very strong and unique per device, which will alleviate any operational difficulty from having unique logins for each tower. It's really a matter of personal preference, but I do definitely recommend having unique logins and having some separation of access between each tower and between customers on the same tower as well. I hope that answers that one. If it doesn't, then please let me know. I may have been reading a little bit too much into that question.
No, you're fine. Thank you so much, Alex. Next question here for you. Regarding UNMS Mobile App, does this include any fees?
No, so that's actually a good point that I probably could have emphasized a little bit more. So I think for many years, I think what Ubiquiti has done really well is make very low cost radio devices. But I think a couple of years back, we saw that one thing that we could do that would really help a lot of network operators is to really address that kind of software side of things as well. So that's what we tried to do with this suite of what I call the network operator software suite, which includes that Link network management tool, the UNMS Mobile App, the UNMS kind of backend system, and UCRM. So all of those are completely free. They will always be free. We don't have a software license purchase or support fee based model for those at all. We'll always provide those tools for free, and you can download. You can use Link at link.ui.com just in the browser for free. You can just download the UNMS mobile app from your mobile app store of choice for free, and you can download both UNMS and UCRM in a Linux compatible Docker container for free from our website as well.
Thank you, Alex. Next question here for you. What is the best tool to figure the best AirMax product for a specific environment?
So that can turn out to be, unfortunately, a little bit more complex than it may appear at times, but a lot of the time it's also a lot simpler than you may think as well, kind of counterintuitively. I think the best tool that we have at the moment is probably link.ui.com, because basically what that will let you do is take into account terrain and link distance. Now, what it can't take into account is potential interference, as obviously we don't have, real-time interference data from everywhere on the planet, right? So I would say a good starting point is to look at what the link range demands in terms of, the gain and possibly the frequency, depending on the terrain. Like if there's trees and things in the way, link.ui.com can provide you with a lot of that information in a very short amount of time. I would then say there's kind of a fairly coarse separation between more urban and more rural environments. And I would say that more rural environments are typically going to be home to something like a Rocket 5A CAP with, a typical 60 or 90 degree sector antenna mounted on something, like a telecoms tower, a crane leg, or whatever you have. In more urban environments, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, both for interference reasons and because we'll typically want smaller equipment physically. So for that, I would recommend things like the Prism station that I was configuring today and the ISO station, because those products are designed from the beginning, basically from the originations of the hardware design, to provide better interference tolerance, but at the cost of lower gain. The difference is that, unlike in a rural case where we want to shoot over, say, 15 kilometers, in an urban environment, we're typically going to be shooting far less than that, maybe 1 to 3, 3 to 5 kilometers, but we're going to have to deal with a lot more interference. So I hope that helped a little bit. I know there's some cases where it's not perhaps especially clear which device is the best. We're working on some updated documentation that should help to address that. And if there's ever any question for a specific install or a specific deployment, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll do our best to answer that for you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Next question here for you. Regarding the Air OS, accessed remotely and configured remotely by anyone, is that correct?
Assuming that you allow them access to that device through the network and you provide them with the same login that they need to access it, then yes. You can access these devices pretty much like you would any other network accessible device. And then it's really up to the operator how they configure that network access, right? You could have a network operator who deploys these devices in a very locked down manner, and you could have one who, I would say should deploy them in a more locked down manner.
All right, thank you. Next question here for you. Can you recap again why it's better to manually set it up over an automatic setup?
So we're talking about channel selection. I'm assuming here. So to be quite frank, our channel selection algorithm does the best that it can, but we typically find that we are able to get better resulting performing links by manually selecting a channel. Now, that is something that we are working on. We're always looking for ways to make this easier to operate, and our eventual goal is really a fully automated system that basically you can put up and it just automatically always picks the best channel. But I would say that based on feedback that we have, we are not 100% of the way there yet, and I just typically find that we will end up with better performing links when we manually select a channel, at least in cases where we have a significant amount of interference. I mean, in the case that I was showing today, that entire band was pretty much clean, so the automatic channel selection will pick a decent channel. But that's just my honest feedback to everyone using the gear, based on our own experience in real life deployment. It's something that we're always working on, but at the moment I would suggest using the manual channel selection.
Thank you, Alex. Next question here for you. In terms of security, will Ubiquiti provide a notification to the main user or admin if there's a login attempt outside of the location of the device?
So outside of the location of the device, I thought as you were saying it, the question would be, would we get a notification if another user tries to log into the UI? Outside of the location of the device, we don't have any, location awareness in terms of the management agent within the device. Our assumption is pretty much if you have the login credentials to this device and you are able to access it via the network path that you have available, then you will be able to access the device because we assume that you have obtained those credentials from the legitimate user. We don't have any sort of location-based warning about logins. It's an interesting question. I think it's something that we can certainly consider, but we will provide in the log, for example, notices of failed login attempts. So that does give you some indication that an unauthorized user has attempted to connect. But yeah, we don't have any specifically location-based, and I'm familiar with systems that do, login-based warnings at this time.
Thank you, Alex. Next question here for you. Regarding AirOS 8, is a free feature or is it a paid feature? Because if it's free, we would obviously need to purchase hardware, but is there certain hardware?
So AirOS 8 is kind of part of that whole free operator software suite that I was mentioning earlier. I must apologize. I usually have a slide in these presentations that lays that all out nicely, but essentially AirOS 8 is in there as well. So essentially that is the free software that operates on the AirMax AC hardware. So any AirMax AC device, not the previous generation AirMax M stuff, but the current generation AirMax AC Gen 2 gear, all comes running a version of AirMax 8, AirOS 8. There's no software license fee. There's no upgrade fee to the latest version of AirOS 8. We are continually putting out updated versions of that via ui.com/downloads. So the software itself is free. You've pretty much just got to buy, the radio hardware as you would expect. And when you do, you just boot that device up and it already has AirOS 8 on it.
Thank you, Alex. Couple more questions still here. What is the AirMax PT-MP mixed mode again?
So the way I like to kind of think about this is we've got a couple of slightly different languages that the AP can use to talk to its clients, right? So when we first came out with AirMax AC, we had a mode that was just called AC mode, right? So that meant an AC AP could only talk to its AC clients, okay? Which meant that that AP could not then talk to a combination of AC clients and previous generation AirMax M clients, which don't use AC technology. So we spent a lot of time developing this mixed mode, and the original purpose of this mixed mode was that it would allow the AP to talk to a combination of AC clients and M series clients at the same time. So, if a network operator already had an AirMax M network, they could swap out their AP to an AirMax AC AP. They could talk from that AirMax AC AP to all of their AirMax M subscribers, and then over time they can upgrade those AirMax M subscribers to AirMax AC subscribers, and they wouldn't need to change anything on the AP. So we've kept upgrading that mode because we figured, well, if we can put all of our development time into a mode that talks to any client that's going to be connected to the AP, that's a better use of time than splitting it between two different modes, right? So we've used that mode as the basis for pretty much our ongoing development. I hope that answers that one.
Yes, thank you so much. Next question here for you. Can you set it up as an access point, or are they just station to station?
So what we did throughout this little presentation here is I set my first radio up as an access point. So that was a full-fledged point-to-multipoint access point setup, essentially. I know it didn't look very complicated, but basically all I would have to do to add another client or subscriber to that access point is just set them up the same as I had set up my subscriber. So basically I could have added, another 59 clients connected to that AP, and I wouldn't have had to change anything on that AP from the configuration that I already did.
Thank you, Alex. A couple more questions here for you. Next one. How many customers could we connect the ISO station?
So the ISO station that we have there, that's typically used as a client device, right? So what I had in this little demonstration here is a Prism station, which is kind of our urban focused AP, and then I had it connected to an ISO station, which is more of an urban focused client device, if you will. So I would say that in the AirMax mixed mode with the flexible link framing that I talked about in the presentation here, we support up to 60 AirMax client devices connected to that AP. Now, if you think about the type of packages that most customers are going to need today, plus combined with how many clients that actually is and the throughput that you can actually get from an AP, typically you're going to be installing fewer clients than that limit per AP. I typically see probably 20 to 40 client devices connected per AP, and by client devices, I mean AirMax client devices. So if you think of each client device as representing a home, for example, a home may then have 10, 20 Wi-Fi client devices. We don't care so much about those from the AirMax perspective. We care about how many AirMax clients we can connect to it. So typically we're looking at 60 AirMax clients connected per AP. I would say most people waver between about 20 and 40, depending on how many clients are in range of a particular AP.
Thank you very much, Alex. Last question here for you. Can you build a station-to-station network with a repeater in the middle, and what would that look like?
So you definitely can. I have done a lot of installs like that in the past, and I walk people through a lot of those as well in the kind of support community as well, and in some of the designs that come up. I would say that there is often a better way than using a straight repeater, unless you're kind of trying to do kind of like a dog's leg shot, as I would call it, or kind of a strange angle to get around an obstruction. The way that I would recommend doing that is by actually having two separate point-to-point links. So rather than having something like you may see these Wi-Fi repeater devices, those are one, they're not compatible with MXAC, but that general model where you just have a kind of a dumb device in the middle, taking everything that it gets in and then just rebroadcasting it out indiscriminately, tends to lower your network performance quite a lot, especially in a contested outdoor environment like AirMax is designed for. So what I would recommend is, let's say you wanted to do that kind of relay setup to get a link around a 90-degree corner, for example, like around a cliff or something. What I would recommend is having a one point-to-point link that joins point A to point B, if point B is your relay point, and then having another point-to-point link, another pair of radios that connects point B to point C. So at point B, we have one radio facing towards point A and another radio facing towards point C, and those two radios at point B are just connected together via a normal Cat5 Ethernet cable. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very, very much. And thank you, Alex, for answering all of those questions and for everyone attending today's webinar. If anyone has any further questions, please feel free to contact your sales rep or email us at sales@microcomtech.com. If you wish to view the products mentioned or shown today, please visit us at www.microcom.us. And remember, this webinar presentation has been recorded and it will be uploaded to our Microcom YouTube channel, so you can view it again. Alex, thank you so much for all of your information and your time today. We look forward to doing another webinar with you in the future. Everybody, have a fantastic day. Thank you again for joining. Bye-bye, everybody.